I was recently at a small business mixer in Berlin, standing near a group of logistics consultants. One German manager, a man who seemed to vibrate with the need for efficiency, was holding court. He was explaining, with surgical precision, exactly why his firm's new hierarchy was the only logical way to minimize ambiguity. To him, being direct wasn't just a trait, it was a professional duty. He spoke about his Polish partners with a sort of polite, bewildered exhaustion, noting that while they were excellent at improvising, their tendency to be vague during tense negotiations drove him to distraction. Why use 10 words to soften a blow, he asked, when one honest word fixes the problem? He seems like the quintessential modern German rational, structured and deeply committed to a clear-eyed view of things. In fact, when the conversation drifted toward the city's many memorials, his tone shifted into something almost clinical, yet profoundly somber. He spoke about Germany's institutionalized responsibility, using words like Vergangenheitsbewältigung, the struggle to overcome the past. He was proud of how his country had dissected its own darkest chapters, inviting every citizen to look directly into the void of the 20th century without blinking. But then, a Polish entrepreneur who had been listening quietly stepped into the circle. He didn't offer a data-driven rebuttal or a lecture on logistics. Instead, he shared a story about his grandfather, framed not through the lens of collective guilt, but through the lens of survival and unyielding national pride. The moment he mentioned the idea of historical justice and the heroic resilience of the Polish spirit, the energy in the room underwent a jarring transformation. The German manager, so comfortable with self-critique and directness moments before, suddenly looked visibly strained, his posture stiffening into defensive crouch. Meanwhile, the Polish entrepreneur, who had been so flexible and round in his business talk, became like a pillar of cold iron. That instantaneous friction, the clash between a culture that finds strength in admitting its faults and one that finds survival in guarding its honor, was startling. It made me realize that even when these two neighbors share a border and a boardroom, they're often speaking two entirely different languages of the soul. Question: how can two nations live so close for so long, yet remain so fundamentally divided by the way they remember, the way they work, and the way they speak their truth?
Wow, that's a profound opening because, on the surface, you're just describing a slightly awkward cocktail party moment. We've all been there.
Oh, absolutely. The tension was just, you could feel it.
But what you're actually describing is a tectonic collision of two completely different reality tunnels.
It felt like the air just sucked out of the room. And that is exactly what we're here to do today. We're going to move past the surface level stuff, the cliches, Germans are on time, Poles are hospitable, and get into the machinery of why this happens.
We need to look at the engine under the hood. It's not about personalities, is it?
Because the mission of this deep dive is to show that this isn't just about personality clashes. It's about how two neighboring nations construct their entire reality, their entire sense of self, based on the trauma of the 20th century.
Right. We're talking about a fundamental clash between the German concept of Vergangenheitsbewältigung, that culture of atonement, of working through the past,
and what Poland calls its politics of history, which is this intense narrative of victimhood, heroism, and survival.
And if you look at the stack of research we have for this deep dive, it's incredibly diverse. I mean, it's not just one thing.
No, it's everything.
We have sociological studies on memory politics. We have historical analyses of Prussian militarism going back to Frederick the Great. We've got linguistic studies on politeness strategies.
And very current reports on the geopolitical crisis in Ukraine, which just throws everything into sharp relief.
It's a heavy stack, but it paints an incredibly clear picture.
Yes. We're going to unpack how these deep-seated historical scripts dictate everything. And I mean everything from how they argue in a meeting about logistics
to how they negotiate the future of Europe. We aren't here to say the clinical German approach is right or the heroic Polish approach is wrong.
No.
We're looking at them as two distinct social ecosystems that have evolved to survive in very, very different environments. They're both survival strategies in a way.
Identity. Because to understand that German manager and that Polish entrepreneur, we have to understand the stories they tell themselves about who they are.
And identity is rarely built on the present. It's built on how we process the past.
It involves a joint history project in a small border town along the Oder River. You've got a German school teacher, let's call him Hans, and a Polish museum curator named Danuta. They're supposed to be collaborating on a commemorative plaque for a local site. Simple, but it turned into a battlefield. Hans, who was very much a product of that German Remembrance culture, that whole culture of remembrance, he insisted that the plaque had to explicitly detail the crimes committed by the Wehrmacht in that specific area.
He wanted the details.
He wanted lists, he wanted dates, he wanted the brutal, unvarnished facts of German perpetration.
Which is very consistent with the post-war German educational model. That's what's taught.
Exactly. For Hans, the integrity of the social ecosystem relied on this brutal clinical truth. He felt that if you softened it, even a little bit, it was a dangerous slide back into nationalism.
It's a moral position for him.
But Danuta, she saw it completely differently. She was viewing this site through the lens of the Polish politics of history. For her, the narrative of victimhood and heroic resistance is the bedrock of national identity.
So she likely felt that listing German crimes was fine, but it wasn't the point of the site for her. The meaning was different.
Right. She felt that Hans's clinical focus on German guilt inadvertently overshadowed the Polish suffering and the spiritual resilience of the town. She wanted to focus on how the community survived, on the heroism.
So it's a battle of emphasis.
A total battle. I saw a comment online from a student who witnessed their debate, and it stuck with me. He said, Hans looked at the facts like a surgeon, while Danuta held them like a wound.
Manage wound. It perfectly encapsulates the divergence we see in the literature.
You have two people, both seeking truth, but they end up building this wall of misunderstanding because their tools for constructing identity are so diametrically opposed.
Let's unpack Hans first. His behavior isn't just a personal preference, it's institutional. It's rooted in that concept you mentioned, Vergangenheitsbewältigung, but it translates to the struggle to overcome the past. But it's more than just overcoming, it's about working through it. It points out that modern German democracy is actually built on the acknowledgement of failure.
That is such a weird foundation for a country, isn't it? I mean, usually countries build their identity on their greatest victories. We won the revolution, we conquered the empire.
Right.
Germany is building it on, we messed up big time.
Exactly, and it creates a very specific type of legitimacy. The legitimacy of the modern German state rests on this promise. We know what we did, and we have built institutions to ensure it never happens again.
So it's a forward-looking legitimacy built on a backward-looking truth.
But the research points out this didn't happen overnight. There was this zero-hour myth right after 1945, this idea that Germany just hit a reset button and started fresh.
Like a collective amnesia?
Yes. Silence was a survival strategy for that first generation. It was too raw. But then came the 1960s, the student movements.
That's when the kids started asking questions.
That generation asked their parents, what did you do during the war? And that question, that single question, pushed Germany from silence to what they call a culture of contrition.
So when Hans insists on listing the crimes of the Wehrmacht, he isn't just being pedantic. He's performing a democratic duty.
He believes that if you stop looking at the crimes, the democracy itself becomes vulnerable.
So for him, nationalism is bad because nationalism led directly to the Nazis.
Correct. Nationalism is the root of evil in the modern German script. There's a direct causal link in their national story.
But then you have Danuta, because for her, looking at the facts like a wound implies that the trauma is still fresh. It's not something you can dissect in the lab. It's something you feel.
And that's because, for Poland, the 20th century wasn't about perpetrating crimes. It was about being erased. The research highlights this massive contrast. If Germany deals with perpetrator trauma, Poland deals with victim trauma.
And that goes back way further than World War II, right? This isn't just a 20th century thing.
Oh, much further. We have to talk about the 19th century romantic idea of Poland as the Christ of nations.
The Christ of nations. Tense.
It is a concept from the poet Adam Mickiewicz. The idea is that Poland suffers and is crucified. It's partitioned by Russia, Prussia, Austria, not just for itself, but for the salvation of Europe. Poland suffers so that Europe can be redeemed.
So suffering isn't just bad luck. It's a holy mission. It has a purpose.
Exactly. And when you combine that with the fact that Poland was literally erased from the map for 123 years, the narrative focus becomes entirely on survival against all odds.
You see it everywhere in their history.
The insurrections, the underground states during the war. So for Danuta, history is a fortress. You don't dismantle the fortress to inspect the bricks for flaws. You hide inside it to survive.
And the 20th century just doubled down on that.
Now, you have the double occupation. Poland had to grapple with both the Nazi occupation and then the Soviet occupation.
Right. And the sources mention the Katyn massacre specifically as a key trauma point.
Yes, Katyn is crucial. 22,000 Polish officers and intelligentsia executed by the Soviets in 1940. But for decades, under the communist regime, you couldn't talk about it.
You had to blame the Germans?
You had to pretend the Germans did it, or just not mention it at all. So you have this deeply suppressed, festering trauma.
So when the Iron Curtain falls, there's just this explosion of, we need to tell our truth, finally.
This is what the sources call the right to memory. Polish elites feel their suffering is often overlooked by the West's intense and understandable focus on the Holocaust.
They feel like the poor cousin of history.
And this feeling drives things like the memory laws introduced by the Law and Justice Party, PS.
Those are the laws that made it illegal to attribute Nazi crimes to the Polish nation, right? Like criminalizing the phrase Polish death camps.
Yes, Article 55A. To a German like Hans, banning a phrase sounds like censorship. It sounds like running away from history. It's anti-democratic.
But to Danuta
And the Pius government, it's a defensive mechanism. They are protecting the good name of the nation. They see it as, we were the victims. Do not blur the lines and make us accomplices. It's about maintaining moral clarity.
When Hans and Danuta are arguing over that plaque, they are actually arguing about the definition of safety.
It's not about history. It's about feeling safe in the present.
Germany sees nationalism as the root of evil. So safety comes from dismantling it, from being critical of it. Poland sees nationalism as the root of survival. So safety comes from strengthening it, from defending it.
When Germany says nationalism is bad, Poland hears, you want to disarm us. You want to take away our shield.
And when Poland says, we are heroes, Germany hears, you are refusing to be critical of your past. You're hiding something.
It's a total deadlock, an impossible conversation.
And while we have to respect Germany's commitment to never forgetting its shadows, I mean, it's a noble meritocratic achievement, really. We also have to understand that for Poland, history is not a laboratory. As you said, it's a fortress of survival. And this doesn't just stay in the history books or on commemorative plaques. It bleeds right into the boardroom. Which brings us to our second section, communication as structural adaptation.
Wow. How do these historical scripts change the way people actually talk to each other day to day?
Ariel saw. A German logistics firm is trying to merge with a local Polish company. We have Lena, a German executive, and Tomas, her Polish counterpart. Right. So Lena is following the German ethos of Sachlichkeit.
Sachlichkeit, it translates to objectiveness, matter-of-factness, but
it's a whole worldview, so she is direct, unvarnished. During a critical review, she points out the flaws in Tomas's strategy with absolute bluntness.
No preamble, no softening, just the data.
Exactly. To her, this is a sign of respect. She's thinking, I respect you enough to not waste your time with fluff. I'm giving you the data so we can fix the problem and move on.
Efficiency as a form of kindness, or at least a form of professional respect.
Right. But Tomas, he perceives this as a lack of culture. He sees it as a personal affront, an attack.
He's not hearing the data, he's hearing the tone.
He's hearing the tone. To him, she is ignoring the nuanced relational context that's so important. In his mind, this directness is almost a form of aggression. He's thinking, why is she attacking me?
And he probably interprets it as a structural adaptation to a past where German orders were never just business. There's a historical echo there.
How German directness acts as a shield against the chaos of the past, while Polish nuance acts as a bridge to protect human dignity.
It is a clash of survival mechanisms, again, just in a different arena. Lena's approach is logically sound for a stable, predictable market.
Sure, it works on paper.
But it risks fracturing the very alliance she's trying to build because it completely ignores the emotional sovereignty that Poland guards so fiercely.
Let's dig into that Sachlichkeit. Where does this intense need for directness come from? Is it just about modern business efficiency?
It's deeper than that. It's historical. We have to look at the influence of Prussia. Our source material from the historian Preitzke is fascinating here. He talks about the ruthless, terrible German directness.
Ruthless and terrible. Not exactly words you'd put in a corporate value statement.
No, but back then it was seen as a virtue. Think of the Prussian officer archetype. The underlying idea is that ambiguity is dangerous. In a military structure or a rigid state hierarchy, if you are vague, people die. If you are vague, the state fails.
So clarity becomes a moral duty.
It's a moral and professional obligation. So when that manager in your opening story asked, why use 10 words when one honest word fixes the problem? He's unknowingly channeling Frederick the Great.
He's carrying on a 200-year-old tradition.
It's all about minimizing ambiguity to maintain social cohesion. The shield metaphor you used is perfect. Rules, structures, direct language, these are shields against arbitrariness and chaos.
If we all follow the rules and speak plainly, we are safe.
And we see this in the linguistic studies, too. The research talks about the Grecian maxims.
Right, the maxims of quality and quantity.
Say exactly what is needed, and say only what is true. In the German context, following these maxims is the height of politeness. It shows you value the other person's time and intelligence. Anything else is a waste.
But then you have Thomas, and he is using 10 words to soften a blow. Why? Is he just being inefficient? Is he hiding something?
Well, he is being relational. We have to look at Polish history again. For 123 years of partition, and then under Soviet occupation, the state was the enemy. The institutions were the enemy.
So you couldn't trust the rules. The rules were designed to control you, not help you.
You absolutely couldn't trust the rules. Survival depended on networks. It depended on unofficial channels, on personal relationships. It depended on reading between the lines.
So if a German occupier or a Soviet official asked you a direct question,
giving a direct answer could get you killed. Or it could get your neighbor killed.
So nuance was literally a survival skill.
Direct defiance was fatal, but roundness, flexibility, nuance that allowed you to navigate the system to protect yourself and your community.
And the bridge metaphor comes in here. It's about building bridges between people.
Yes. Polish communication prioritizes the relationship over the immediate transaction. You have to preserve the face of your partner to maintain the network. If Lena destroys Tomas's strategy in front of everyone...
she thinks she's just fixing a logistics problem.
But she's actually destroying the network. She's humiliating him. Mm-hmm. And in a culture that relies on social bonds for survival, that is a capital offense. You don't recover from that.
It's so interesting because the German manager in the intro called this improvisation and vagueness, but the Pole sees it as resilience and flexibility.
It's the perception of culture. In Polish discourse, politeness and indirectness are markers of civilization and respect. They contrast it with the perceived coarse roughness of Prussian-style directness.
So they see it as primitive in a way.
Yes. Why are you barking at me? We are civilized people here.
Lena thinks she's being honest and efficient. Tomas thinks she's being imperialistic and aggressive.
That is the tragedy of it. Lena is a product of a society that trusts its institutions. If I follow the rules, we are good. Tomas is a product of a society that had to survive despite the institutions imposed on it. If I maintain the relationship, we're good.
And when those two meet, you get that instantaneous friction. It creates a real barrier to cooperation, even if the economic incentives are perfectly aligned.
Which is why understanding this isn't just about being nice or culturally sensitive. If you want to merge a German and a Polish company, you can't just align the spreadsheets. You have to align the languages of the soul, as you put it.
Which is, it doesn't just happen in boardrooms. It happens in the halls of power in Brussels. Which brings us to Section 3. Geopolitics and the erosion of consensus.
This is where the stakes get incredibly high. We are moving from the personal and the corporate to the continental.
I have another story here, from the sources. I was reading an account from a young diplomat who attended an EU summit where the topic of European values was being debated. He described this moment of palpable friction between a German representative and a Polish official. And it was over a proposal for a unified history curriculum for European schools.
A noble idea on paper.
The German representative spoke passionately about the need for a critical memory culture to prevent the rise of contemporary populism. You know, the Hans model.
The Hans model scaled up to the EU level.
Exactly. But the Polish official responded with a defense of national honor, arguing that a unified curriculum was just another form of ideological shift imposed by more powerful neighbors, the Danuta model.
So it's Hans versus Danuta all over again, but this time they're deciding the future of European education.
Right. This friction wasn't just about textbooks. It was a primary driver of the fragmentation we see within Western alliances today.
Right.
I heard that after the meeting, the atmosphere was one of quiet exhaustion. It's hard to watch the unified European consensus erode because we can't agree on how to remember the 20th century.
It's a clinical case study of a social ecosystem in crisis.
Is that while Germany's self-criticism is a noble meritocratic achievement, it can sometimes feel like a luxury to a nation like Poland, which is still busy reclaiming the history that was stolen from it.
That is a crucial distinction, self-criticism as a luxury.
Let's unpack the EU aspect of this, because Germany and Poland have fundamentally different views on what the European Union is.
Right. It's not a shared assumption.
For Germany, the EU is the answer to the failures of the nation-state. Remember, the nation-state led to World War II, so the goal is post-nationalism. You share sovereignty to prevent war. You dissolve the borders that caused all the conflict.
But for Poland?
For Poland, the EU is an alliance of sovereign states. After fighting for independence for centuries, giving up sovereignty to Brussels feels like another form of domination. Remember, they fought for 123 years, and then against the Soviets, just to exist as a state.
They finally got their sovereignty back in 1989.
You're not in a hurry to give it up to Brussels. No. So when Germany says, let's share sovereignty for the greater good, Poland hears, let's dissolve the very thing you just spent centuries bleeding to get back.
Exactly. And this leads to the new Moscow rhetoric we see in the sources, specifically from the PS party. They sometimes frame Brussels, and by extension Berlin, as the Fourth Reich, or a new form of Soviet control.
First, it was Moscow telling us what to do. Now it is Brussels.
It's about resisting any threat to Polish self-determination.
That brings us to a really fascinating concept from the source material, ontological security. But it explains so much of this behavior.
Essential. Ontological security is the need for a state to feel secure in its identity, not just its physical borders. It's about having a coherent story about who you are.
Your national autobiography.
Your national autobiography, exactly. Poland needs to feel like the hero victim to make sense of its existence. That is their story, is how they've survived.
Okay, so where's the threat?
The threat is what the sources call a normative threat. The West often views Eastern Europe as lagging behind. You hear the language, oh, they're illiberal, they're still catching up, they're the younger brothers.
Right, there's a condescension there.
A huge condescension. And this creates ontological insecurity in Poland, the feeling of being treated as second-class Europeans. It's a direct attack on their identity.
So how does Poland react to that insecurity?
It drives the defensive nationalism. The more the West critiques Polish judicial reforms or media laws, the more Poland doubles down on its sovereign narrative to protect its self-image. It's a defense mechanism. You attack us. Well, we are the heroes who saved Europe from the Bolsheviks in 1920. We are the ones who stood up to totalitarianism. Who are you to lecture us?
And then everything changed in February 2022, the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
This was a massive pivot point, a critical situation in ontological security terms.
Because suddenly, the Polish narrative wasn't just a story they told themselves anymore. Reality.
It was total vindication. For years, Poland had been warning about Russia. They called Russia the eternal enemy. They begged Germany not to build the Nord Stream 2 pipeline.
They said, this is dangerous. You are feeding the beast.
And Germany didn't listen. Germany was pursuing Wandel durch Handel, change through trade. The idea was that if we just trade with Russia, they'll become peaceful and democratic.
And when the tanks rolled across the border, that entire German policy it collapsed overnight.
Utterly discredited.
So Poland got to say, I told you so.
It did. But more importantly, it shifted the moral authority in Europe. Poland transformed almost overnight from the troublemaker of Europe, the one getting sued over judicial reforms, to the humanitarian superpower and the continent's military leader.
Right. They took in millions of Ukrainian refugees, and they did it instantly, without hesitation.
They didn't frame it just as helping people. They framed it as a continuation of their heroic history. It aligns with the old Polish slogan, for your freedom and ours.
By fighting for Ukraine, they are fighting for Poland against the Russian Empire.
And it aligns them with the U.S., with anti-imperialism, and it completely distances Poland from the Russian sphere of influence. It solidified their identity.
Meanwhile,
Germany had a dilemma. Germany's post-war pacifism, born from that WWII guilt we discussed, suddenly looked like inaction. It looked like weakness.
There was so much hesitation.
Chancellor Scholz announced the Zeitenwende, the turning point, but then there was all this agonizing over sending helmets, then tanks.
And Poland was there the whole time, pushing, criticizing. Send the tanks! What are you waiting for? History's calling.
Exactly. The dynamic completely flipped. Poland is now building one of the largest land armies in Europe. They are aiming to be the guarantor of European security. They're effectively challenging Germany's leadership role.
They're saying your model of leadership failed. Our model, the fortress model, the heroic model, is what Europe needs now to survive.
It's a realignment of the social ecosystem in real time. The center of gravity in Europe is shifting east.
And it's driven by these deep historical currents. You can't understand Poland's military buildup or their stance on Ukraine without understanding Danuta and the Christ of Nations and the trauma of partition. It's all connected.
It's all one story. We started with Hans and Danuta, the clash of memory. Germany institutionalizing shame to protect democracy.
And Poland institutionalizing heroism to protect its very existence.
Then we looked at Lena and Thomas, the clash of communication. German directness as a shield against chaos.
And Polish nuance as a bridge, a tool for survival networks.
And finally, the EU summit, the clash of political vision. Germany wanting a post-national Europe, a Europe beyond borders.
And Poland fighting for a sovereign Europe, a Europe of strong nations, emboldened now by the vindication of the Ukraine war.
The core insight for me is that sentence we used earlier. Germany uses history to warn against power.
And Poland uses history to justify the need for power.
Germany looks at its past and says, we were too powerful and we misused it, so we must be restrained forever.
And Poland looks at its past and says, we were too weak and we were erased, so we must be strong enough that it never happens again.
Two lessons from the same century leading to completely opposite conclusions.
The social ecosystem is in flux. We are seeing a realignment of Europe, and it's being driven by these deep, powerful historical currents.
Absolutely.
We often assume that shared economic interests, like that logistics merger or common borders or a single currency, are enough to bind nations together. We think if the spreadsheets align, the people will align. But what we've seen today suggests that until neighbors can agree on the past, they are living in two different versions of the present. Perhaps the stability of Europe doesn't depend on a unified curriculum or a single currency, but on the ability to recognize that for some, looking back is an act of contrition, while for others it is the only way to ensure they still exist.